Priti Patel.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak on Amendment 20 today, which I tabled in my name and has the support of many colleagues, more than 25 other honourable and right honourable members. And Madam Deputy Speaker, it is not breaking news, I should add, that I remain concerned about the introduction of a global minimum corporation tax. We've debated this in the House in previous stages of this committee. But I would also just add that obviously ministers, the front bench, the Chancellor, and obviously colleagues, including the Honourable Member for Ealing North, on the opposition benches, are aware of my views. But I think it's right that we have the right level of scrutiny on this policy, because this is about the implementation that I have concerns, and I've consistently raised concerns on this. I would, Madam Deputy Speaker, before I come on to a range of concerns about the policies, just point out, I think the Chair of the Select Committee, if I may just touch on her remarks as well, actually spoke about the need for business certainty, which is crucial, as did the Honourable Member for Ealing North. I do believe that the implementation of this tax and this tax policy actually does create challenges for businesses and business certainty. It also, as the Chair of the Select Committee has highlighted, just exacerbates the complexities that businesses will face when it comes to administering these policies, and also the implications of the capital allowances.
Give way.
I will, of course, give way.
Most grateful, and may I congratulate her on Amendment 20. The only certainty that the opposition benches want business to know, the taxes are so high that business fails. That's about the only thing they can do. So far as this is concerned, can she tell the House what the Americans think of this idea and where they are in their thinking?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his support to the amendment and also for his comments. And of course, the United States, as we've discussed previously, and I was going to touch on this as well, are not in the position to introduce the policy. It is fact, like our politics here and politics anywhere in the world, that the Republican Party have made it abundantly clear that they will not allow this policy to go through. They want to go even further, and they want to bring legislation which will put retaliatory measures in place against countries that impose this new tax and burdens on US businesses and multinationals, which is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, coming back to the amendment and the debate today, and I will come on to some specifics with regards to the dialogue that I've been having with the Minister and the Chancellor on this, it's right that we have scrutiny of this particular policy, which this amendment has sought to do. And actually, I think it's right for the government to pursue international agreements to address the complex tax arrangements, which have already been referred to, that exist with multinational corporations and businesses operating in multiple jurisdictions. That is absolutely vital. That makes sense. I'll give way, of course.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Member for giving way on that point about multinational corporations. I would just wanted to ask her whether she thinks that it's right that we treat these multinational corporations that, for example, produce oil and gas in a different way to the way that we are treating renewable energy companies that produce renewable energy and invest in renewable energy projects. Because at the moment it seems to me the Energy Profits Levy treats these things in different ways. And I wonder if she will be supporting the Liberal Democrat amendments to the bill to encourage investment in renewable energy projects.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention and his comments. I mean, I would rather businesses had clearer taxation policies, and I should also just declare an interest as well. I was a Treasury Minister many years ago where I actually undertook the fiscal review for oil and gas, and quite frankly, we need to do everything to stimulate investment in both oil and gas and also renewables, and I'd like to see consistency in some of the policies here on this as well. But specifically to my point about multinationals and how they are taxed in jurisdictions, I support the government in the sense that it's right to look to close tax loopholes where we see them operating in multiple jurisdictions. But these plans for a global minimum tax are wrong, and I've mentioned that and raised that in the House before. They are wrong and flawed for a number of reasons. And the introduction of such a measure is complex. No one would deny that at all. This is not straightforward. And I, of course, paid attention to the Honourable Gentleman for Ealing North's comments as well. It's no point just saying we need to crack on and implement this. We have to do it in the right way, and hence the reason why I put forward the amendment to even give the government scope to have some more time to look at the complexities around the implementation and also to look at what our competitors are doing as well. I don't think that we should just rush headlong into this at all. These are complex changes and they'll be challenging to enforce, and I'm going to speak about this as well. I believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's anti-competitive. It undermines our fiscal sovereignty. Now, without labouring the point too much, we have left the EU. The government does have the ability to make its own tax laws, and fiscal sovereignty is absolutely crucial to this as well. Why are we now going to surrender tax powers to the will of the OECD? But actually, along with economic growth, which has been mentioned already by the Honourable, my right honourable friend, the chair of the Select Committee, we don't want to undermine our ability to be a low-tax global beacon of free trade. The government is pursuing policies such as free ports. We all welcome this when it comes to competition, but we don't want to be encouraging a culture of subsidies, which of course this policy will do. Now, I do believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, that governments and parliaments have to have flexibility when it comes to setting its own fiscal policies and tax rates, and striking that balance across all sectors, including multinational companies, and if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, SMEs. They are the backbone to our economy. I say this as an Essex MP, which is known as an entrepreneurial county. We have to get that balance between being competitive and low in terms of attracting investment and generating revenues, which I agree with the honourable gentleman from the opposite benches for Ealing North, to support public services, because if we're not competitive, we're not going to have the tax revenues to support public services. But a minimum corporate tax would prevent us from doing this. And there are problems with the OECD's plan, which is why I want to have greater scrutiny on the implementation. The enforcement and implementation mechanisms are unclear, and countries could find ways, and I think we should be concerned about this, Madam Deputy Speaker. They could find ways, loopholes, to circumvent the actual policy. And while the UK looks set to gold plate measures, we do follow rules and we follow standards when we sign up to them, and I think that's the right thing to do, actually, when it comes to our government policies. The same cannot be said for more than 130 countries who have taken an interest in this. For many, agreeing to the OECD framework appears more to be about the rhetoric and being seen to take action on taxing multinationals, rather than actually making the changes necessary and following the committed approach that this government is planning to take. And I have no doubt that the Minister will want to speak about this, because the government is being diligent in terms of the approach, and there's more scrutiny required on this. Moreover, limiting fiscal freedoms also opens the door for countries to entice investment from big businesses with big subsidies. And of course, that is distortionary when it comes to the market itself. And so I think all honourable and right honourable members will understand that in a subsidy race, we simply cannot compete with, let's be frank, Madam Deputy Speaker, the United States or even China. And some other countries can pump millions of dollars into supporting investment from multinationals. But that's not what we do. That is simply not what we do in this country. We are more competitive as a country by being able to deploy a full range of fiscal and tax-cutting powers than we are in a race to the bottom with subsidies. And there are also serious concerns about how these plans will be enforced and, importantly, how disputes between countries will be resolved. And I understand that negotiations with the OECD are taking longer than expected. That is not a surprise. And I think it will be some time before they are reached. But by baking this into primary legislation, a requirement for us to implement without any further flexibility, we do risk blindly signing up to a package where foreign officials could actually overrule decisions and interpretations in our own jurisdiction and in our own government. And the peer review panels being set up to review the implementation could be made up of representatives from China or other hostile states, Russia, all countries that are involved in this process, and states, I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, that have records which we in this House debate day in, day out, which concern us on human rights, on war crimes and other conflicts, and quite frankly, they don't meet our standards. And I think we should be cognizant of this. Our tax affairs could be judged by representatives from states that many of us in this House are concerned about. And then, of course, there's the issue of the date, which I have referred to in my amendment, which is specific to the implementation. The government has been clear that it will implement this by the end of this year, as Clause 264 states, from the 31st of December 2023. And this measure, despite the concerns I'm raising, can only have a chance of succeeding in the way in which the government hopes it to be implemented, in a constituent manner by all states, or by, if not that, by a critical mass at the same time. And I think this is where we do have concerns, because we're just not seeing this right now by other countries and our competitors, because they're not as wedded to the date as we are. And I understand why we have them to put the date and enshrining it in law. The United States, as my honourable friend has just raised, is not going to be able to take this forward for implementation by 2024. The Republicans in the House are opposing those plans. But as well as opposing and preventing the USA, our largest trading power, from introducing them, they are threatening retaliatory measures on countries who do implement, and in doing so will penalise US-based companies. So we could have a situation where the government is introducing a tax measure that could adversely impact on our trade and investment with the USA. And of course that could have an impact in trade negotiations in the future, and some of the work that other departments are doing, trade for example, in this government. And I think, it'd just be interesting to know from the Minister, if this was discussed by the Prime Minister and the President in their recent bilateral talks, because it's not just the United States, and the US is crucial in this, but it's not just the United States which will not implement, but EU members are not going to be implementing this fully on day one. They've been given 6 years to implement this. In Asia, major economies and competitors are setting dates behind the UK, and that's Japan, Singapore, Thailand, and Hong Kong. So while I know the government has been very clear about its intent, we do need to know effectively what the government intends to do around implementation. I'm on the record now in terms of my own concerns about this tax. I have concerns about it. I think the date is wrong. But I'm also very, very mindful, and Madam Deputy Speaker, I do just want to touch on some of the discussions. I will give way, yes, of course.
She knows that I signed her amendment,
course,
and
yes.
I think it's a good amendment because it's a compromise as it stands to give the government more time to think carefully about what we're doing here, particularly, as you said, the Americans are almost certainly not going to implement this, which means the single largest trading nation in the world will not play a part on this. So what then we come to is, what assurances does she have from the government so that whether or not she moves her amendment tonight, and if she moves it, I would support it, but if she isn't going to move it, I understand she's got some assurances. Could she spell out what those assurances of the government will be that allows us to see this?
I thank my right honourable friend, and I think this is important, because the whole purpose of scrutiny of this bill and discussing this amendment is actually about the implementation and how the government is going to pursue the implementation. I do think we've got big concerns. Other countries are not moving forward, and therefore we will be the first. But I do believe that we need some sensible and practical course of action going forward. And it's a reasonable measure, the amendment that I've tabled, but importantly, the government itself, through the discussions that I have had with the Chancellor in particular, he has given some very, very clear assurances that, in light of the points that I have raised, not just today but previously, and the conversations that I've had, and in fact all colleagues that have signed the amendment, Madam Deputy Speaker, have had as well, is that the government, what they will do in respect of the implementation of this tax, they've given commitments to bring to this House regular updates on what the OECD is proposing with regards to policing Pillar 2, which speaks to my point about how all the enforcement mechanisms work, about whether or not countries will be circumventing the rules and the structures of Pillar 2. But also, before the summer recess, bringing forward some detailed assumptions and modelling, which have led to the Treasury forecasting and scoring, as I understand it, the expected tax revenues from Pillar 2. This is something, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I have been pursuing, and I've been asking specific questions for, because I think it is important that we understand what revenues are gained, as well as the costs that will be brought forward as well, particularly on businesses. I have also very specifically received clear assurances that the government will publish ahead of the autumn statement some details on the compatibility or even the lack of compatibility and the interoperability of the US's global minimum tax legislation and that proposed by the OECD, because of course that has an impact on double taxation for companies and the implications there as well. And then come into the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, at subsequent future fiscal events, the first one being in the autumn this year, to present the real assessment of the progress countries are making around Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, around the policy, and ensuring that the government is providing very structured updates within the fiscal frameworks that the government has in terms of the impact of this policy on our economy. As well as major economies by not implementing this by 2024. So there are substantive, if I may say so, Madam Deputy Speaker, commitments. I do just want to commend the Chancellor as well, because he has been incredibly constructive in discussions and dialogue, and I'm grateful to him. And also to the Minister as well, because she's had to pick up the heavy lifting with other colleagues as well. But I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, first of all, I will not be moving this to the vote. I have had in writing, I should just add that as well, this commitment from the Chancellor today. We've had an exchange of letters between the Chancellor and myself, and I think that's very important to get on the record that he's been very constructive on the specific requests that I have made. But I do just want to conclude by saying, I mean, I would love there to be more flexibility on this policy, I really would. The government does have a big opportunity in, let's say, the next 6 months of this calendar year before the commencement date to look at what other countries are doing, to take learnings and also to reflect upon the macroeconomic backdrop that we are faced with right now. Not just domestically, but domestically this matters a lot to businesses, but also internationally. And also with regards to just the administration of capital allowances, which we have discussed in previous debates as well, because they will still pose burdens to businesses, and we have to make sure that, you know, certainly on this side of house, it's a Conservative government that is not putting burdens on businesses, but we're actually doing everything possible, as colleagues have discussed today as well, to bring the tax base and tax burden down, but actually simplify taxes for businesses as well, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thank you.